Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know worth the living just because he lives. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives.
Well, welcome to another edition of Mind of Christ. We are still in the Sermon on the Mount, and we are working our way through that sermon. And today we're going to be in Matthew chapter 5. We're going to consider first verses 31 and 32 about divorce, and then we'll be in verse 33 down to 37. We'll talk about vows. I think we can do both of those today. And so thank you for joining us. This is a serious, in-depth treatment of the mind of Christ, and it is based on a theme called Challenger Deep. Challenger Deep is the deepest part of the ocean, and it's a great metaphor for the mind of Christ, which is also very deep. And we're going to be plunging into the depths of that today as we continue our study of the Sermon on the Mount. So let's jump into it, and I want to read the text that we'll be considering today first. And then we'll be going to my journal that will give you my study that I did back in 2011 on this particular part. So here's the reading for today. Matthew chapter 5, verse 31. And it was said, whoever sends his wife away, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife except for the cause of unchastity makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. And then in verse 33, and again you have heard that the ancients were told, you shall not make false vows, but shall fulfill your vows to the Lord. But I say to you, make no oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is the footstool of his feet, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Nor shall you make an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your statement be yes, yes, or no, no, and anything beyond that is of evil. All right, let's jump into our discussion of divorce here. Matthew chapter 5, 31 and 32. Concerning divorce, the first question here is, why is this wedged in between anger, lust on one side, and keeping our oaths on the other side? The answer should be obvious from experience. Anger and desire are probably the two big enemies of a faithful and loving marriage. One of the reasons marriages fail is because anger or tension or conflict within the home, and then also because of marital unfaithfulness of adultery in the home. And so he follows those two treatments of anger and adultery with, when looking at a woman constituting adultery, he follows that with the teaching on divorce. Keeping the peace and not letting one's frustration with the other person grow, and controlling our desires sexually, or any covetousness that may be a part of our lives, will stabilize the marriage. The other support is realizing how important our oaths are. Marriage is built on keeping our word. And so really this treatment of marriage or divorce is appropriate in the place we find it in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus begins by addressing their proof text. Deuteronomy 24 verse 1, when a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out from his house, and she leaves his home and becomes another man's wife. That's the statement that was in debate under the law. It's Deuteronomy 24 verse 1. And a lot of it hinged on how you interpreted the idea of finding some indecency in the woman. And the result is, if she marries another man who divorces her, the first husband is not supposed or allowed to even remarry her. The reason being that she has been defiled, which is an abomination. So here we have a woman who has been dismissed or divorced by her husband because he finds some indecency in her. She goes out and marries another man. If that man divorces her, then the first husband is not allowed to take her back because she now is an abomination. Now, if the certificate of divorce given by the first husband freed him and her, then why would she have been defiled in the second marriage? That's a good question, because the second marriage would have been legitimate. I guess assuming that the man who married her also had a legitimate reason to be remarried. Jesus answers this question. It is because the husband who sent her away caused her to commit adultery by marrying the second man. And so if the husband who sends her away or divorces her not for adultery, but for some other reason, he causes her to commit adultery with the second man. Jesus has already taught much in the Sermon on the Mount about causing someone to sin. Just as the hand and the eye are occasions for stumbling, the husband who divorces his wife also is the occasion for her stumbling. It seems clear that the defilement is simply that she remarried and had sexual relations with the second man, since even if the second man dies and she remarries the first, she is still considered to be defiled. Now, I hope you're following all this, is that it really hinges on how you interpret Deuteronomy 24 and verse 1, and whether or not a man has a right to divorce his wife for practically any and every reason. And Jesus is saying, no, the only reason you can divorce your wife is because of marital unfaithfulness. So for me, puts a whole new spin on the matter and shows how the Jews proof-texted Deuteronomy 24 by simply not applying the rest of the text to the context. Now, it is amazing we can see only what we want to see in a text. The indecency he finds in his wife is not specified, and in actual cases, because in actual cases, it becomes an excuse for any trivial matter that he wants to say. He can just simply say, I find her indecent in this area. She's lost favor with me. Divorce became easy under this interpretation of Moses' words. A better reading of the text was showing Moses was arguing for the opposite outcome. Jesus is very specific about the indecency the husband may see in his wife. The indecency has to be unchastity, and the word is porneia, harlotry, including adultery and incest. Fornication is the word. Now, this is a major indecency, not trivial at all. And the exception word makes this even more serious. If a wife is related or released for any other reason and is remarried, the first husband is the cause of her committing adultery. Therefore, the husband needs to be very careful about the grounds on which he divorces his wife. Jesus holds to there is only one indecency that allows him to divorce his wife, and that is fornication or porneia. Except in this, the word except in this text means apart from. In Acts 26 and verse 29, Paul wishes Agrippa and all there were like him with the exception of the chains that he was in. So it was apart from the chains. Here we cannot miss the exception clause. Had he not put that in, he would have risked offending his audience because he was standing there before them in chains. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 28, Paul, after speaking of the many dangers of his ministry, he says, apart from such external things, there is the daily pressure upon me of concern for all the churches. He could have said, with the exception of these dangers, there is internal pressure, anxiety over the churches. So the exception clause only is very limited in nature, limited to what is specifically specified in the clause. That Jesus here is giving one reason for giving the wife a certificate of divorce is clear. There are two ways this woman can be defiled. Number one, by committing fornication while married to her first husband, and second, by remarrying when she has been released by her husband for a cause other than fornication. Now, she's in double jeopardy. And if she committed adultery or fornication, then she's defiled. If she is divorced for any other reason other than fornication and remarries another man, she becomes defiled with that other man because she has no right to remarry. In the culture, women could not divorce their husbands, and divorce for a wife often left her completely vulnerable, making it even more likely she would remarry just to survive, just to have food coming into the home or taking care of her children. The consequence of the woman remarrying while being released from the first husband is that he causes her to commit adultery and indirectly causes her second husband to commit adultery. Now, you cannot have only one party guilty of adultery without the other also being part of the adultery. And so the man who flippantly divorces his wife for some reason other than fornication is setting up a sequence of events that could cause his wife to eventually be an adulterer herself, because she would be marrying another man and committing adultery, and he would also be culpable for the adultery. The word divorce here is apoluo, A-P-O-L-U-O. It means to free fully, to relieve, to release, to dismiss, to let something die, to pardon, or to divorce. It means to let loose from, to loosen or unbind a person or a thing. Without the reality of fornication, the husband does not have authority to release or loose his wife. He is not authorized to untie the knot or to loose what God himself has bound. Matthew 19 makes clear what God has bound together, let not man separate. The sin here is usurping the authority of God, taking matters into our own hands. If the woman and her second husband are both guilty of adultery, then what is the guilt of the one who set this whole thing in motion? The first husband. What is his liability? What has his guilt for releasing her? What was his guilt for releasing her while not authorized to do so? And what is his guilt for his marrying again? Jesus does not address the latter, but he certainly implies the former. He is speaking to everyone who, and so this is something that has to do with everyone. This confirms to me that Jesus' strictness on marriage and divorce and remarriage. Jesus was pretty strict about this. But it also indicates that the issue is a matter of the heart. As Jesus said in Matthew 19, the basis of any certificate of divorce was hardness of the heart. Jesus is not discussing legalities in the sermon. In fact, just the opposite. He is contrasting the Jewish tendency to do that without considering the matter of the heart involved. Jesus, if listened to, would have caused many of the Jews, and today many Christians, to get to I'm having trouble reading my own notes here, but he would cause many Jews and many Christians to get into a position where they would have had a tightness in their stomach, because they would have been thinking, oh my, we've really messed up here. And so that's all I'm going to say about the divorce and remarriage issue in this, because I just want to stick to the facts of this particular text. I understand there's tons of questions on divorce and remarriage, and I'm not here today to unravel all of that. But I'm just simply saying Jesus is addressing this proof texting that they were doing from Deuteronomy 24. And he is saying, look, you need to be careful how you interpret that scripture, because you have interpreted it in a way that is going to set up a sequence of consequences that's going to involve this woman in fornication or adultery, and you're going to set up another man who may marry her in the same sin. And so a man who divorces his wife needs to be very careful about the reason why he divorces his wife. Now let's go to the next section on vows, which certainly is applicable to follow this section on marriage. The basis of marriage is one's vows before God. The first question I have is, in the Old Testament, did God through Moses command vows in certain circumstances? And was Jesus removing all oaths, though not removing commitments? So he's not removing the commitments that we make. Is he just simply saying you're not obligated, or you should not make an oath before God? A brief mention is made in Leviticus 19 and verse 12. He says, you shall not swear falsely by my name, and so are to profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Here he does not command or prohibit oaths, but demands that they be truthful to reflect the true intent of the heart. If you're going to give an oath in the name of the Lord, you need to make sure that your oath is truthful and you fulfill your oath, or you profane the name of the Lord by which you swore. Numbers 30 gives an extensive treatment of vows. Here are some of the main features of this text. Number one, a man is bound to his oath, period. If you make an oath, you're bound to it. Number two, a woman still under the authority of her father is bound by her oath if her father says nothing to repeal the oath. So if the father repeals the oath, then she's not bound by it. But if he is silent, then the oath stands and the woman is bound. So because she's under the authority of her father, he can rescind the oath and clear her of her obligation. But if he doesn't do that, then she's bound to the oath. Number three, a woman under the authority of her husband has the same situation. In other words, the husband can repeal the oath. The vow of a widow or divorced woman binds unless previously released by her husband. So if a widow or divorced woman makes a vow, she has to keep the vow. Number 5, when a husband annuls the oath, he also bears her guilt. But if the oath is not annulled, she remains obligated. By the husband's annulling the vow and bearing the guilt, she is forgiven. So he can assume the guilt for not fulfilling the oath on her part. It seems Numbers 30 does not address swearing falsely directly. Well, Deuteronomy 23, 21 through 23 teaches not to delay paying your vow. To do so is a sin in you, and God will surely require it of you. It is not a sin to refrain from making a vow. Promises must be performed, or they should not be made. Vows are obligatory, but they are voluntary. In other words, you don't have to make a vow, but if you do, then you are obligated to fulfill it. Note the nearness in the text between Moses' teaching on vows and the marriage, divorce, remarriage issue here in Deuteronomy 24. So here in Deuteronomy 23, he talks about paying your vows. In Deuteronomy 24, he's talking about divorce and remarriage. And then in Job 22 and verse 27, Eliphaz, one of Job's friends, suggests that Job needs to return to the Lord and pay his vows. He's suggesting that that's why Job is in trouble, is because he didn't meet the requirements of his vow. In Psalm 61 and verse 8, David promises to pay his vows day by day. And we need to look at Ecclesiastes chapter 5 on this as well. One issue regarding vows is impulsivity. In order to make ourselves look more credible than we are, we might swear to a truth or commitment before we think it through. Ecclesiastes 5 addresses this. Verse 1, looking at sacrifices. We should first draw near to listen, he says, instead of just rushing to sacrifice. Remember previously Jesus says if you are at the altar and remember you have offended a brother, you're to leave your gift at the altar, go be reconciled to your brother. In other words, take some time before you go to the altar and make sure you don't have some obligation that you need to take care of. In verse 2 of Ecclesiastes 5, he says, do not be hasty in word or impulse in thought. And so when we're too impulsive and we say things and we make promises or we swear an oath, we sometimes get ourselves into trouble. We do not just rush in before God. Let your words be few, since God is God and we are mere mortals. So you don't rush in before God. So when you promise to do something, it's an obligation before God, not just simply an obligation before the person that you've made the oath to. And so we need to go into the presence of God with a lot of thought. Regarding vows in verse 4, when you make a vow to God, do not be late in paying it, for he takes no delight in fools. So a man who makes an oath and doesn't fulfill it is a fool, he says in Ecclesiastes. Pay what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. Well, these verses make clear that it is a serious matter to make a vow before God and not keep it. In Judges 11:29, we see a case of an impulsive vow that had tragic consequences. Jephthah was a judge. He was fighting the Amorites. He wanted God to give him success in battle, so he vowed to sacrifice as a burnt offering the first thing that came from the door of his house after he returned from battle. God gave him success in the battle, and his only child, a daughter, came out celebrating the victory. It says in the text, And it came about when he saw her that he tore his clothes, and he said, Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and you are among those who trouble me. For I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot take it back. Well, I don't know why he was blaming his daughter. He's the one who made the stupid vow, and he's the one who obligated himself to something that was impulsive. The daughter didn't have anything to do with that. He was impulsive, but noble in desiring to keep his oath, but foolishly noble. Which was the greater sin? To impulsively make an oath or to sacrifice his daughter? He would need to see God's forgiveness. He would need to see God's forgiveness for either one. But how serious it is to make a vow and not keep it. And again, back in that text in Judges, some believe that instead of actually sacrificing her, literally killing her on an altar, that she just simply remained unmarried for the rest of her life, and that was the consequence of the oath. So it is not clear if Jephthah actually killed his daughter or if she merely became a perpetual virgin. But the text to me strongly indicates the former, that he did fulfill that vow. The only connection to Jesus' teaching is how vows can go seriously wrong if they are impulsive and if they're just stupid vows. It is almost as Jesus is saying people cannot be trusted with oaths. They are not reliable enough or powerful enough to back up their yeses and nos with a swear word. Yet Jesus does say people can be trusted with yes and no. So what does an oath do to change yes and no? An oath implies some consequence to the object of the oath if I do not fulfill the oath. If a person swears on their mother's grave, what does that mean? The object of the oath represents something important to the one who is swearing the oath, almost like collateral or on a loan. It backs up the oath, where if I do not keep it, I lose something. An example, a connection with my mother's grave. I'm not sure. If I don't keep the oath, I dishonor my mother's grave or life. And since this is invaluable to me, her honor, I would not risk her honor. I would not risk this disconnection from my mother. Jesus mentions 4 objects of oath. He mentions heaven, earth, Jerusalem, and your head. So those are 4, I would assume, 4 common oaths that were given by the Jews. Are these merely witnesses to my oath? There does seem that these are not all equal. Did the Jews have a hierarchy of oaths, each one progressively more binding? This is indicated in Matthew 23, verses 16 and following. A distinction is made between swearing on the temple or the gold of the temple. They believed the gold was more important than the temple. But Jesus says the temple sanctified the gold, not the gold the temple. The same is true about the altar and the offering. To swear by the temple is to swear by God in the temple, and to swear by heaven is to swear by the God of heaven. All these mean that the Jews played games with oaths, binding and loosing as it benefited them. The object of your swearing supposedly binds you to your oath. However, what you say and how you say it may in fact mean it doesn't count. It is like kids when they would promise something and they would cross their fingers behind their back, making it null and void. It was a game, making our word not mean anything. The Jews did it with some system that they created. It was a man-made system, a tradition that nullified their word, the word of God. In this section, Matthew 23, 16 through 22, Jesus calls these folks blind guides, fools, and blind men. The question seems to be one of relative importance. What is of more value, the altar or the gift on it, the temple or the gold on it? This was a theme with the hypocrites' importance, whether their personal importance or the importance of what they was their tithe versus what the versus what they observe as the weightier matters of the law. In other words, they would have relative importance. They would say, we're going to tithe mint, dill, and cumin, but they neglected the weightier matters of the law. And so they were setting up a lot of times some kind of system that said, well, this is really important, this is not really important, so I'll swear by something that's not really important in order to not be held to the obligation to fulfill my oath. Jesus is saying, enough games. God does not play games. Jesus goes beyond this. He says no oaths. Simply let your yes be yes and your no be no. We should be suspicious when someone tells us something and has to back it up with, I swear. The Hebrew writer explains the nature of an oath. He says, for men swear by one greater than themselves, and with them an oath gives a confirmation, is an end to every dispute. The word confirmation is a word that means to establish, ratification, corroboration, firm establishment. It's used in Philippians 1:7, where Paul speaks of the defense and confirmation of the gospel. In 1 Corinthians 1 and verse 8, it is God who confirms us to the end. So again, all this is about how oaths confirm something. 2 Corinthians 1:21, God establishes us with an anointing or confirms us. Colossians 2:7, being established in the faith or confirmed in the faith. Hebrews 13 verse 9, it's good for the heart to be strengthened by grace or to be confirmed by grace. In Mark 16 and verse 20, the word was confirmed by signs and miracles. Romans 15 and verse 8, Paul was sent to confirm the promises given to the fathers. 1 Corinthians 1:6, testimony of Christ confirmed in you. Hebrews 2 verse 3, confirmed by those who heard. In other words, the idea of confirmation, that oaths confirm something. And the Hebrew writer quotes Genesis 22 and verse 17. But 22:16 reads, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord. Verse 17 says, indeed, I will greatly bless you, and I will multiply your seed. So why did God swear when Jesus tells us not to swear? In the same way, God desiring even more to show to his heirs of the promise the unchangeableness of his purpose, interposed it with an oath. Now this is back in Hebrews chapter 6. The word interposed here, he interposed it with an oath, is a go-between. It's a reconciler. It's an intercessor. It's a mediator. So in this case, with God, the oath served as a go-between between God and Abraham and his seed. For God's part, he did not need a go-between, but for our sakes, we need all the assurance we can get for our faith's sake. And so the word is used here as to Christ being a mediator and so forth. So it's the same word. So when God imposed or interposed the oath, he used it as a go-between us and him in order to make more certain and more sure for our benefit, so that our faith could be rooted in that. So could it be that Jesus is God's oath? Since he is the mediator, he's the go-between, that God, in order to make his purposes completely clear and completely binding, that he used Jesus himself as his oath, that he was a living oath. Remember, it says that God swore by himself, and Jesus is God. So how do I get my head around this? Well, Hebrews 6 says the oath was the mediator, and everywhere else this means Jesus. Therefore, we could conclude that the oath was Jesus. Jesus is God's yes. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, all the promises are yes in Christ. God's yes is yes, and God's yes is Jesus. Amazing. What a new insight. Another nugget on the way to the depths of Challenger Deep. The unchangeable things of Hebrews 6 verse 18. One is that God cannot lie. And number two, the other is that must be the oath itself. And since it is by myself or by Jesus as the mediator, there will have this unchangeable nature of Jesus as well. And this was for us, his heirs, those of us who have fled to take refuge by laying a hold of the hope set before us. God wanted his children to have the firmest assurance that he could give to his children. Now back in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says to go beyond yes and no is evil. Evil. And the word here is perissos, P-E-R-I-S-S-O-S. It is something in superabundant in quantity, is superior in quality. The idea seems to be excess, something more than yes or no. So to go beyond, to go to something that is superabundant, that is in excess, more than yes or no. The word evil here is the word that means bad, it means unsound, it means evil, effective, it's wrongful, it's malignant. And it's used in many places here. I'm not going to give you all of the places where it's used, but let me just give you a couple that are found in the Sermon on the Mount itself. So in Matthew 6 and verse 23, he says, if your eye is bad or evil, that is defective. In Matthew 7 and verse 17, every bad tree or evil tree bears bad fruit. In Matthew 5, verse 11, he talks about men who saw all kinds of evil. In Matthew chapter 5:39, do not resist him who is evil. In Matthew 5:45, God causes the sun to rise on the evil. All of these are places where the word evil is used in the Sermon on the Mount. Now, also in Matthew 7 verse 22, what proceeds out of man is what defiles a man, and one of those is envy. Matthew 7:11, if you being evil know how to give good gifts to your children, so God knows how to give good gifts to those that he loves. So the word is used in a broad range of contexts, but it's never good. Evil is evil. It's never good. So when Jesus says anything beyond yes or no is of evil, indicates to me motive. To bolster our words with oaths is to imply evil motives. If a person does not intend to do what they say, no oath will change that. If a person does intend to do what they say, no oath will strengthen that word. The essence of integrity is to tell the truth even when it hurts, and to follow through when we say we will do something. This is the big commitments of life as well as the small matters of life. Some will be faithful to show up on time, but unfaithful to their spouse. Back in 533, where he says, make fake vows, is what the New American Standard Bible, the King James Version says to forswear in 5 and verse 33. It is really to perjure oneself. It's perjury, and it's most associated with court. A person takes an oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, with a hand on the Bible. Not so much these days. So help me God, we often say. In the presidential oath of Chester Arthur may have been the first to use so help me God. A distinction is often made between affirm and swear. Some who have a conscience problem with the latter, in other words, they don't want to swear an oath, they will affirm. So, but we often add, "So help me God." Sounds like um, so it sounds like an acknowledgement of our need for God's assistance in keeping the oaths. When we add the phrase, "So help me God," we're actually saying, "God, help me keep this oath." "So help me God" was prescribed for all U.S. judges and officers other than the president in 1789 by Congress, of all places. Well, a person under oath is obligated under penalty of law to tell the truth on the witness stand or in a deposition. A tactic of some attorney is to try to get the witness to perjure themselves so as to discredit them and to cancel their testimony. If a court proceeding is to be valid, truth must be told. There is no justice where there is no truth. We also speak of swear words. We sometimes call these profanity. These include much more than pejorative words. The intent is to take something beautiful and deface it or make it ugly. To profane something is to bring it down to the level of the common. It's the opposite of sacred. Some words or phrases include God's name, and taking God's name in vain is prohibited, obviously, in the Ten Commandments. Casually and non-serious uses, casually and non-serious use of God's name was so detestable to the Jews that they were forbidden to ever even pronounce the name of God, lest they take it in vain. Bottom line, words mean something, and our word must be guarded as an extension of ourselves. And so here we have two additional teachings, one on divorce and another on vows and how we are to maintain our vows. And I hope this has been useful to you. I hope you will join us next time. If you're looking to find other material for Central Church of Christ, you can go to centralsarasota.org, and you will find on our website a link to everything that we have produced over the last several months. But until next time, we will continue our study of the mind of Christ. You have a great day.